Hello, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about Dracula versus Frankenstein, the next movie by Adamson. You may remember in the last video we talked about Brain of Blood, and before that, last year, we talked about Horror of the Blood Monsters. I would say Adamson is getting a little better with each movie here, because Dracula versus Frankenstein is pretty crazy. You may also remember that there was another film called Dracula vs. Frankenstein in 1970. It was also called Monsters of Terror and Assignment Terror. It was written by Jacinto Molina Alvarez, a Spanish screenwriter and actor, played the Wolfman. In that movie, there was no Dracula. There was Frankenstein's monster, there was a mummy, there was a werewolf. There were aliens, but there was no Dracula, although there was a vampire. And this one, even though it actually has nothing to do with that movie other than that they kind of have the same title, this one has a similar strategy of throwing a whole bunch of stuff at you. We do have Dracula. We do have Dr. Frankenstein, although it's not the original Dr. Frankenstein. It is a descendant of Dr. Frankenstein because this movie takes place in the modern day. Technically, it takes place in 1969 because that's when it was shot. It also has Lon Chaney Jr., who is famous for playing the Wolfman in the Universal Wolfman. Also famous for playing Frankenstein in The Ghost of Frankenstein. Also played the Mummy 3 times in Universal Mummy movies. Also played Dracula's son in Son of Dracula. Here he is in this movie. And in this movie, he doesn't even speak. He plays like Frankenstein's assistant, who is mute and dumb. And he plays with a little tiny dog and cuts people's heads off throughout the movie, including a bunch of Nazi bikers. This is going to be hard for you to follow, I think. In fact, I watched this movie and paid as much attention as I could, but so much happens in this movie, it's hard to keep track. Let's see here. I'm going to say this is a 7 out of 10, mainly because it's really fun. Okay, some of the visual effects don't look that good. The acting is not very good. They do have a lot of other actors in this movie that were somewhat well known. I can't even keep them all straight because a lot of them I haven't seen in other things, but Russ Tamblyn is a Nazi biker in this. He was in West Side Story and The Haunting, and he was in Drive, a more recent movie with Ryan Gosling, I think I got that right. Also, there are multiple actors in this movie that were in Brain of Blood. In Brain of Blood, there was like the world leader who had an assistant, and the assistant in that movie, his name, he goes by a fake name here. I don't think they even put it on this flyer. Oh yes, they do. Zandor Vorkov, which that is not the guy's name, but he plays Count Dracula in this. I saw in the Al Adamson documentary that Zandor Vorkov is considered to be the worst Dracula ever. He's not very good. I think I read that he was the stockbroker of one of the producers of the film, and that's like how he got into the movie. There's also, who else is in this? The guy that plays Frankenstein was in some Universal movies. J. Carroll Naish, that's his name. The dwarf assistant in Brain of Blood plays a dwarf assistant in this movie, Frankenstein's assistant. He's kind of crazy in this. Who else? What else? We got so many characters. Oh, the guy that played Gore in Brain of Blood, which is basically a Frankenstein-ish monster, plays Frankenstein's monster in this too. What's his name? I can't remember his name. Angelo Rosito is the dwarf. You can see his name up there. I'm trying to think. I know. The guy's name, the guy that plays Frankenstein's monster, his name is John Bloom. Not to be confused with the other John Bloom, who goes by the alias Joe Bob Briggs and reviews horror movies. He's probably a much more famous John Bloom. Okay, so 7 out of 10. It's fun, but I'm not saying it's good, okay? But it's fun. So, let's go through the plot. The beginning of the movie, we've got Dracula shows up, kind of unexplained, out of nowhere, no dialogue, bites someone on the neck. Okay, next scene. Yep, that's it. That's all that happens in that first scene. Next scene, some woman is at a carnival and gets her head chopped off. You don't know by whom yet. Okay, no dialogue, no explanation. Next scene, a woman is singing a song. It's a whole musical number. Okay, so it turns out that woman is looking for her sister. Little does she know her sister's head was just chopped off. We soon learn it was chopped off by Lon Chaney Jr., the mute, dumb, mentally disabled man who likes to play with puppies, who's working for Dr. Frankenstein, and apparently Dr. Frankenstein has discovered that if you tragically suddenly kill someone, it does something to their blood, and then he can use the blood in a serum, and the serum can be used to, well, I'm not sure if they really explain it very well, but we find out later in the movie, well, Dracula finds out about this serum, and he says that if he uses the serum and injects the serum into his own body, he can become completely invincible. Because as you all know, vampires have a whole lot of weaknesses. The sun, stake through the heart, all sorts of stuff, right? Cross, garlic, and all that. So he wants to become invincible. He needs Frankenstein's help. He basically threatens or blackmails Frankenstein. It's a little hard to follow. Meanwhile, you have the dwarf who leads a couple of hippie-ish kids through the carnival ride, and then inside the carnival ride, Dr. Frankenstein runs a freak show, and there's all these people's heads getting chopped off, and you don't know if they're real or fake, but they're probably fake, but you're not sure. And then this biker gang comes and harasses the woman who had done the musical number. And oh my God, what else happens? All sorts of stuff happens. They're about to rape this woman, and then Lon Chaney Jr. shows up and kills all the bikers. And what else? The hippie main protagonists are gonna fight Dracula, and Dracula sicks Frankenstein's monster on them. Meanwhile, Dr. Frankenstein gets his head chopped off by accident. The dwarf ends up falling down like a trap door and landing headfirst on an axe blade. And then one of the hippies takes a flare and blinds Frankenstein's monster, so then he accidentally attacks Dracula. And then Dracula has to make Frankenstein's monster come to his senses. And then Dracula decides that he's going to suck the blood of the girl who sings the song. And then Frankenstein all of a sudden doesn't like that. Frankenstein's monster doesn't like that. So then Frankenstein's monster decides to fight Dracula for real. Then they end up going into a forest. Dracula rips off the Frankenstein monster's arms and then head, and probably the goriest scene of the movie. And then the sun comes out and Dracula shrivels up and turns into a skeleton. So, if that sounds good to you, I would watch it, because obviously hearing all that stuff means nothing. You just got to see it happen. There's not that much of a story, really. It's just a bunch of crazy stuff happening. So I give it 7 out of 10 because I like when a bunch of crazy stuff happens. I think generally this is considered to be a pretty bad movie because the acting is bad and the story doesn't really make sense. And the visuals don't look great because it looks like everybody's arms and heads that get ripped off are made out of paper mache. But I thought it was cool. I mean, as we often talk about, Herschel Gordon Lewis was putting gore into movies in the 60s, but it still wasn't that common. And if you watch all these videos, you notice that in 1971, the gore gets amped up. 1970 only had a few crazy movies like this, and in 1971, it's over half of them that we've talked about so far. And, it's I'm sure that, well, I know for a fact that trend just keeps upping the ante as the 70s carry on. So, Dracula versus Frankenstein, I do recommend it if you like schlocky, bad horror, which I do. There is a third movie called Dracula versus Frankenstein that actually Jesus Franco, who we've talked about many times, did. He did it, you know, the Spanish title translates to Dracula versus Frankenstein. And I think that one comes out in 72, pretty sure. I think I was going to say one more thing before we go. Oh, Al Adamson. As I mentioned before, I'm liking his movies more and more as they go, but I don't think he does another one for a few years, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately for everyone else. But yeah, he did dozens of movies, and I think there's only like 6 of them were horror. And 3 of them were from 70 to 71, and I think 1 or 2 of them were in 69 also. Maybe 3. So he had this like horror period that we are basically coming to the end of. But he did do 1 or 2 more later before he was murdered and buried in his own floor. I don't remember if I mentioned that in a previous Al Adamson video, but that's what happened to him. It was like a contractor that he had hired and tried to basically live in Al Adamson's house. There's a whole thing on that. There's a documentary about Al Adamson, which is very interesting, whether you like the movies or not. Because the documentary itself is very well done, probably better done than any of his movies. You can see it on Shudder and probably some other places too. All right, so that's it for Al Adamson, 1971, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that is the last movie by any director that had done something in 1970. So we took all the directors from 1970 and saw what they did in 1971, and this is it. So from this point forward, or from the next video forward, it's going to be all films done by directors that are new or that hadn't done anything in 1970. Maybe they did something in the 60s and now they're back. But we should get a lot of fresh stuff coming up in the future here. So I'll see you then.